Welcome to the We've All Done It podcast. If you are struggling with some toxic work BS, you, my friend, are in the right place. Office politics are hard, and sometimes we are the fun and dysfunction. I am Kimberly Benoit, your host and author of We've All Done It, getting real about the role we each play in a toxic workplace. With over 20 years of leadership experience, and yes, my own toxic missteps, I will be joined by leaders just like you and I to explore common leadership situations that every leader finds themselves in at some point in their career. We discuss lessons learned in a judgment-free space because no matter how it feels, we aren't alone in our struggles. We all have our own BS, and we can support and learn from each other. Alrighty, everybody, welcome to the latest episode of We've All Done It. I am super excited today because I have two of my favorite people, but we're tackling a topic that I think is really important. And also the other reason I'm excited is because this is the first time we're going to do a panel where we're going to have two guests talking about a topic. And so the topic today we're going to be really breaking down and hopefully helping provide some legitimate guidance to people about is how to lead a friend. So when a dynamic changes where you have your friends and then one of you gets promoted into a leadership position, what has to change? What do people need to think about? What did they get wrong that results in, HR complaints for things like favoritism or discrimination because their BFF is now leading and providing maybe better, different treatment. So how do we help leaders be smarter about this dynamic shift? So before we get into that conversation, I want to give my guests a chance to introduce themselves. And based on the recent debate you have not heard, we've decided that Mr. Jerry Benoit is going to go first. So Jerry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good morning. Jerry Benoit. I'm a regional vice president for a worldwide leading engineering and consulting firm. And I've been in management, supervision, mentoring, leadership for 12 plus years now. So I'd like to think that I have some expertise and at least some opinion on the subject matter.
And last but definitely not least, Miss Erin Dallas.
Hi, everyone. No, I'm Erin Dallas. I've been friends with Kim for many years, and I am not in management. I have no desire to go into management. And I am an account exec, meaning I sell stuff to government agencies. I work with a worldwide provider of equipment for government agencies, and I've been in the legal sales world for most of my adult career. And I'm really happy to be here with Jerry and Kim. Yeah.
So for those who do not know, Jerry is my brother. So yes, that last name is not a coincidence. And Erin, I have known her longer than I have not known her in my life. And so we went to college together. So we have seen the best and the worst of our lovely life journeys. And they were both guests last season. So if you have not heard their episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to them. I'll make sure to give you direct links in the show notes to make it easy for you. But there's a reason why I asked them to come back, because I think they're incredibly brilliant. And I think they have tremendous insights into different perspectives of a team environment and a team culture, and where things can go incredibly well and where things can go completely off the rails. And so for this topic specifically, because we've talked about these individually before, which is why I thought it would be a great topic for the podcast, is we've all seen these power or dynamic shifts on teams we've been on, teams we've led. Maybe not Erin, but I mean, you've seen this happen, and you've seen it go really well, and you've probably seen it go really poorly. And so I thought we'd start out with just some general thoughts from you guys of what makes this shift so hard for people.
All right, I'll start because it's the management role. It's hard for some people because it goes from someone that you could really shoot the shit with. Mm-hmm. Like you could gossip, you could talk about what you heard and all these different things about work. And the minute they become management, it really becomes, you have to be careful what you say, because otherwise you're being a tattletale or snitch.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means you have to own, excuse my language, your fuck ups. So, because this person, if they're your friend, they know the stuff that you have done and will do, um, things
Yeah.
that you'll do to try to get around a micromanager they had before. So it's just, you're still friends with that person, but you can't act the way you did with previous management. Even
Oh,
if you were following the rules, sometimes you bend them. And I love to gossip, and you just can't do that anymore.
see, and
Or on a different level.
that's a fascinating take because I feel like most people actually feel the other way of like, oh, my friend's now the boss. So like they're going to hook me up. And because
I
I've
never
seen
think
that
that.
dynamic. So you're like, so that I love that that's the perspective you have is like, oh, now I'm going to get called on my shit.
Uh-huh. I've
So
never done that at
what about
all.
you, Jerry? Because I can see you chomping, like ready to go.
Well, it's interesting because I've seen both sides of that. Like I've been the employee who had a peer that was elevated above and then was reporting to a friend, and I've also been the friend who got promoted and elevated over. And I've seen both sides of that coin. I've had some of my peers that felt that the floodgates could open because I was now their supervisor and that they could get things pushed through faster, things that they wanted. They could talk about other people, and it made it easier for them to, I guess, be unrestricted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've seen it go the other direction where, to Erin's point, they're like, yeah, they know where all my skeletons are and they know exactly how I worked and kind of weaseled my way around company policies or what the company needed me to do. And then that they shut that wall down completely. So yeah, it's not one size fits all, but I've seen both sides of it, and it's very interesting to kind of be on both sides of that fence.
I think it's some of the stuff that throughout the years, whether it was me or someone else, like I always felt from a leadership perspective, it's really awkward because I feel like there's no winning, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's hard is because everybody knows y'all were friends before. And so there's like a no-win situation. There's going to immediately be assumption you're going to favor them. It doesn't really matter. And what makes it harder too is you can't discuss personnel issues. You can't openly tell your team, like, I made this choice because if it gets into stuff that, is just not appropriate to share. And then on the other side of it, the assumption, like you potentially have lost a friend because, to your point, there's a wall that's going to shift in some people where it's like, well, I can't talk to you the same way that I did before. I don't know, like to your point, Jerry, I've seen it go both ways, but I think that's where and why this topic was really important is from a leadership perspective. What do you think most leaders get wrong? Because ultimately it's about the leader. It's what they or how they approach it, right? You can't control what the team member does, what your team, you know what I mean? But from a leadership perspective, you can take various actions. So what have you seen from both of your perspectives that leaders did like super wrong, or maybe or the conversely, what did someone do that they did that was like, man, that helped manage the situation? Is this episode hitting a nerve? Are you facing complex people challenges and have tried leadership books, workshops, and the advice from everyone, and somehow it's still not working? Now imagine having a trusted leadership partner who understands your specific challenges and strengths. My one-on-one leadership program provides the support you need with a customized plan. If you'd like to learn more, click on the link in the show notes and book some time with me. I'll explain how it works. Now back to the show.
I'll jump in. I think the biggest issue out the gate is for someone who gets elevated into that position over friends and peers, assuming that nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest problem, is thinking that I can maintain these relationships. We can still continue to scuttlebutt and gossip and talk like we talked before. That is a huge misstep for a new manager because you automatically lose credibility with your now new boss above you. Mm-hmm. And you lose the credibility with your team because of the perception, or even not even the perception anymore, but the actual showing favoritism to people who you were close with before when you were peers. So acting like nothing's changed is the biggest problem that I've seen. And I mean, I even made that misstep my first time making the jump. So I'm talking from living through those pain points myself.
Well, and it's funny because I've actually had to coach leaders about this because they just didn't see it as anything that needed to change. Like they were like, no, we can still go be friends on the weekend and go shopping together and go do our things. That doesn't affect what happens in the office, not understanding it absolutely does. Like people still see it, especially if you come back to work on Monday and talk about it, like everybody knows.
Yeah. Oh, well, this weekend I was out with the boss and we were doing this. Oh yeah. That goes off not well with team members.
What about you, Erin? What have you seen go well or like go horribly wrong?
The things that I've seen go horribly wrong, it was from the new leaders that thought their friends would act like they were a leader. So the leader went in expecting, okay, such and such knows me, knows this has been my dream. I'm now in management. They're going to help me. No, that person, again, was their bestie and thought, ooh, wow, now I can get ahead. So that person had to crack down on their friendship and try to set boundaries that their friend that they'd had for 20 years had a really hard time accepting. That's why I do what I do. And I put those walls in place. And I think that does work well. So perfect example, my previous company, my really good friend from the company, she was promoted to my manager. I was really excited, not because we were friends. I was excited because she had done the job. She knew the issues that we were all dealing with because we had all complained at length with each other. And so she was willing to push back against management whenever they made crazy ass demands because they still didn't really understand what exactly we did. So she didn't have as big of a problem with taking over our team because for the most part, everybody was in their 40s and above. Everybody was an attorney that just chose not to practice and was working. So we knew about the boundaries and we knew about the rules and we respected that she would respect and support us. But again, other situations, there are those people to be like, my best friend is the manager. I don't have to change anything. And they still go and they do all the gossiping. And then somebody would get called on the carpet and then they'd be like, well, who told? So I think a large part of it depends on your friend's personality, that person you're going to manage, because there's always going to be that asshole that's going to try to get over. So what helped a lot too, we had a conversation before, like she told me she got the job before it was announced because she wanted to celebrate with somebody. And so, we celebrated and then I told her, here's what I won't do to you. So we're still friends to this day. When I left the company, she was still my friend. Their sales meeting is actually in town next week. And when I get back from Phoenix, I'm picking her up from the hotel and we're going to spend the day hanging out. So the friendship, it changed, but not a whole lot because we each respected those boundaries. And that's something that she did with other people as well, was have that conversation with them about what they want from a manager and what we hated from the previous management. So, yeah.
I think this also feeds into, especially if it's a new manager or somebody who's never done it, those are difficult conversations to have. And new, inexperienced leaders, and I love this because it's always a topic that you get asked to train on. Can you help with a difficult conversation? And so usually when people say that, they think of like performance like poor performance or something. But I think this is actually a great example of a difficult conversation because you're having to talk to somebody that, to your point, Erin, you have gossiped with. They know where the bodies are buried. Like they know all your ins, outs, in betweens. And now you're having to come and say, we have to change the construct of our relationship. And I think that's really hard, especially if you think it's going to result in you losing a friend. But again, the minute you get into a position where you control people's performance, where you control their pay, their promotionability, or their developmental path, that's something you have to do. Like, that's why I say if you can't handle that, then you probably shouldn't be a leader, period. Like, not everybody's cut out to be a leader, why I've always valued your very staunch approach of that's just not something you have a passion for, because I don't think people know them. Sometimes people aren't as self-aware and think, well, I can try it, but it has such detrimental effect on everybody involved if it's not the right fit. But I want to ask this because I think it fits in this, and I have my own opinion, which I'll share, because this came up a lot. So in my last role, we would get complaints about where someone would get promoted up and they had been besties and they were friends on social media. Then one got promoted, and where employee relations complaints would start to come in because people would see pictures of them like on Instagram and Facebook or whatnot, doing a bunch of things. But the leader wasn't, so it was two women. And the leader was not friends with everybody on Facebook. And so it was like highlighting their weekend exploits. And then it tied into, and then they started to tie in, well, she gets better shifts, she gets preferential treatment, these kind of things. So the question I want to ask is, what would you recommend to leaders, and I'm saying leaders specifically, around being your social media activity with subordinates?
Don't do it.
Don't
do it at all.
Don't.
Seriously. Yep. I'm sorry. So we were friends before. We remained Facebook friends because one, she didn't really post a lot and stuff like that. I've had other managers who are like, well, you didn't accept my friend request. No, damn it, I did not. We should not be Facebook friends. I've had management get upset because I didn't want to do it. And one manager complained so much, I ended up I gave him limited access where he only saw public posts. I was like, well, I don't really post. Don't do it. It's just, no, let it go. That's one of those things you have in that conversation. And if you all do hang out together, you hang out with your friend, man, don't post that shit where people can see it. Keep that on your computer, on your phone, in your memories. You don't have to post it.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. If you want to quote unquote connect with people, do it over LinkedIn. It's a professional site. You can accept the requests from everybody in your organization through LinkedIn. It's a quote unquote professional site. It used to be a professional site, may still be a professional site. Depends. Even though some people treat it like Facebook or
dating site, yes,
or Insta, but
that's a whole separate episode right there. Is what is going on in LinkedIn?
Yeah, just don't do it. Don't do it, because from a manager's perspective, you're automatically putting yourself in the firing line that you're treating your reports, your direct reports, differently and showing favoritism, even though you don't think you are, and that is not your intention. That is the perception, and that is going to be what is going to follow you in that organization, wherever you go.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Erin.
Going back to that, so working in a sales organization, you have those god-awful week-long sales meetings where you're together 24/7, the 4 or 5 days that you're there. You can still be friends with your manager, because in the evening time when everybody is drinking and shooting the shit and eating, you can still hang out with them. There are going to be other people around. Your conversation changes somewhat, but you can still be friends with that person. You just have to adjust how you're friends in a public setting when there are other coworkers around. I have several thoughts. So one, my gut instinct has always been no. Like, I remember the first time I got a Facebook request from my leader, and I actually was like, what is this? Like, we're not friends. Like, we're not even remotely close to being friendly. Like, we respected each other professionally, but like, this is a little older. It was before LinkedIn. And I remember wondering if I needed to have a conversation, because if I didn't accept it, did that mean did that have a negative connotation for me if I didn't accept my leader's invite? And I think part of this all goes back to that power dynamic of, okay, you as a leader have to always remember you're in a power play position. And so I think especially when you're thinking about social media,
I agree with LinkedIn. I do wonder to some degree if generationally this might be viewed differently. But I would say the way that I'd always get people to really think it through is what if it were you on your team, and then you just so happen to see that your leader is hanging out a ton all over Facebook, because you know how the algorithms work. It's like, oh, we somehow are connected in the, the universe. And how would you feel about that? So if you don't like the way that would feel, then why would you want anyone else on your team to feel that way about you? Right? Do you want, so it was always like, put yourself in someone else's position. But, to your point, Erin, like I often wonder generationally if that's what younger generations are doing, particularly, is they'll say yes to things and then they'll compartmentalize them into a specific group that only sees pieces and parts. But my personal thing is no. Yeah. There's, for people who complain there's no privacy, it's because if you're putting it out there, then you're allowing your privacy to be invaded, first off. So like you have to know your own boundaries about what you think is right and what is wrong. But unless you're willing to be friends and go drinking with all your team and go hang out all weekend long and barbecues with all your team, then that should be a hard no. Like, and of course, everyone's going to look at me like I had lost my mind. And I was like, but that's the standard. If you don't want to be accused of favoritism or discrimination, then it's either all or nothing. And that's kind of how you have to think about it.
And that all or nothing scares me, because what happens when your manager thinks he's your friend? Mm-hmm. And he brings up the fact that, oh, I've been to everyone's house. I've met everyone's family. Why haven't I met your family? What the fuck are you, my boss, not my friend? So, I mean, I've had that boss, and that was that same boss that wanted to be Facebook friends. Seriously, I had to go to his house to meet his wife. Because he was like, we're traveling, we're on the road. She wants to know who I'm with. I'm like, you got a whole bunch of different issues.
That's a whole different problem.
That I'm not involved in. And true enough, when shit hit the fan with that marriage, like, did you tell my wife? Well, tell your wife what, dude, you're my boss, not my friend. So you also have to look at that, because some of those all or nothing people that are willing to do that with employees, they have a hard time with boundaries. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why I always find fascinating, because when I would say the all or nothing, because I wanted to push the extreme of it, every single one of them was like, no, because of course not everybody likes every person that reports to them. And so they're like, I would never, and there was usually a name that would immediately come up. Mm-hmm. But I think that's one of the areas where I think people, going back to Jerry's, one of the things he said in the beginning is assuming nothing changed. The minute that power dynamic shifts, everything has changed. Mm-hmm. And if you underestimate that, that's when trouble's going to start pretty quickly.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So, question. So assuming you're in and assuming allegations are being made. So here's one of the things I've always found fascinating is when there is a leader who appears to favor someone and they don't feel they do. So how would, as a leader, if you're being accused of favoritism or of favoring somebody you were friends with before, what would you want to see a leader do? What actions would you want to see a leader take?
I'm blunt. I'm going to tell them. That's probably why some managers don't like me, because I'm just so direct. Mm-hmm. I'm going to flat out say, I'm sorry, it looks like you may be favoring A because they get to do A, B, C, and D. There are a whole bunch of other people who would be perfect for it, not necessarily even me, but other people would have been better candidates. That's where I fall. I'm that person. And you can do it without being a dick when you do it, but life is too short not to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you spend most of your waking hours at work. So exactly. You got to be able to address it. But what would you think, Jerry? Like,
well,
having been on both sides.
I'm gonna come from the management down side. So first off, you have to be comfortable enough in your ability. And I know this is hard for a new manager because you're really not comfortable in any of your abilities when you're first getting into that role. But you have to be self-aware enough to be able to accept constructive feedback from the people you manage. if they call you out on your bullshit, because sometimes you're blind to it and you don't see it and you don't think you're doing it, but you have to be willing to own that.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that coin, though, you also need to make sure that you have the receipts,
Yeah.
on holding everybody accountable on your team.
Yeah.
But if somebody does come at you and they're like, I think you're favoring that person because you're letting them get away with X, Y, and Z, then it needs to come back to, let's discuss how I hold everybody accountable on my team.
Mm-hmm.
These are my expectations for everyone. This is how I hold everybody accountable, and walk through that as a way to try to combat that. If you're not a manager that shows favoritism, and I mean, let's be real, everybody in every form shows at least some form of favoritism in some ways, right? We're not all, we're human at the end of the day, but you have to be able to know that at the end of the day, here's how I treat all of my people fairly, but be willing to own up to it when somebody does call you out, if you're aware or not aware that you actually are showing favoritism to somebody. That's hard. That's a really, really hard thing. And it's taken me a long time to be there.
So I've been on both sides of that too. And so as a leader, and this is why I like what you've said. So I had somebody accuse me of favoritism, and I can see from their perspective why they thought that, because they were a problem performer. They were struggling in their role, and the other person was actually excelling in their role. They were a high performer. They were doing everything well. So like in their minds, naturally, it felt uneven. And so again, because I had documentation. So if there's anything I can drill into people, it's like, write stuff down, because you will not remember. Like, we're not that good. Our attention spans are way smaller now than they were ever. They're the smallest now than they've ever been. As a leader, write stuff down, keep notes about stuff. But again, it came back to talking about like accountability. And now I know in her mind, she still will always believe that I was favored the other person. And I understand, I can appreciate her perspective, but it had nothing to do with the fact that I liked her. It had to do with performance. Now, on the person, having been on a team where I've seen my leaders be manipulated because of someone they favored, that was a really hard place to be, because I did what Erin did. I went and tried to have a candid conversation and say, and my leader didn't believe me. So I think if there is one tip I would give someone, is if someone comes to you and is brave enough to come to you and say, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this. Like, so-and-so is using your name as credit everywhere they go. Someone is saying, I can come in and cry in your office and get whatever I want from you if I just shed a few tears because you can't handle X, Y. Like, whatever it is, don't dismiss it out of hand, even if it doesn't feel true to you. Like, if someone is brave enough to courageous enough to come in and tell you these things, do some deep reflection and maybe investigate a little bit, ask more questions of other people before you immediately say, no, that's BS. And like, no, I don't favor that person. Because truthfully, and going back to what you're saying, Jerry, is you may unintentionally be favoring somebody and you might not even be maliciously doing it, and you might also be getting played and not know you're getting played.
Exactly.
So I would just encourage people to not get super defensive out of the gate and really focus on asking more questions.
And the communication around that conversation is extremely important. And from a manager's perspective, how you address it. Because if you come at it the wrong way and you're defensive and you're standoffish and, you just don't handle it well because you can't take that feedback that you might not be ready to hear. If you approach it the wrong way and you come down hard on that employee or employees that bring it to you, you've lost your entire team.
Yeah.
You're going to lose your entire team at that point and all your credibility shot, and you might as well start looking for another job at that point, because you're never going to win that team back.
Or, well, it's even like, not even that, your turnover is going to go. Like, people are going to and because there's leaders, and I remember this. I remembered hearing, God, that leader has such a turnover problem, but nobody could figure out why. And then you dig a little bit and you're like, oh, I get it now. And sometimes it had to do with, there was favoritism. And I don't know, again, I don't think it was necessarily malicious, but when you allow that much power to shift in the team, it can become an awful, awful place to be. And no one wants to stay there because, again, like, you know, if I could encourage leaders with anything, it's work on your self-awareness. Like, don't be super defensive. And again, if you can't handle somebody criticizing you, you probably shouldn't be in leadership.
Good Lord, no. And see, for me,
Agreed.
it's a little different, and I guess maybe a little weird, because most of my adult career, if I just go back like the last 16 years, only 3 of those years were spent working in an office. So for the most part, I'm remote with my manager, like hours or, you know, days away from me. They're in different time zones and things like that. So I'm used to working on remote teams. And when you're in the office, to me, that's usually when I would see the things like the favoritism pop up. And those were usually managers that didn't like my direct and blunt style. Because I just, look, you spend too much time at work, like you said, not to be able to, if you're expected to take criticism as a manager, like you said, you have to be willing to accept it because everyone does fuck up occasionally. There are inherent biases. You may be thinking about what you know about that person, how I'm that person that doesn't always speak up. I don't toot my own horn. And I've had managers tell me that. I don't, because
it's very common with women, though.
Yeah, FYI. Exactly. Yeah,
sorry, Jerry.
Sorry, yeah. As far as I'm concerned, I should know what I'm doing. So when my friend became my manager, she did do more things because she knew what I was doing and not tooting my own horn.
Yeah.
So that was, in a way, it may have looked like favoritism because it was like why would Erin do that? But it's because she knew what I did. I'm just not the person to say, hey, look at what I did. I'm like, hey, don't you know? So no, it's stuff like that. And it is hard. And you do want to maintain those friendships. But I have a question for you all as leaders. What happens when the leader, through still being a leader, get to know this person ahead of time, became friends with one of their subordinates?
Oh, so like they developed a friendship after like becoming a leader?
Exactly. Have either of you ever experienced that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, and it goes back to the same thing, like, because it's where you have to be so aware of your own actions and behaviors, because like there's certain personalities you're just going to naturally be more drawn to and you're going to have similarities with, especially when you're in the same industries and those kind of things. Like, and there's also going to be people you're not going to vibe with and you're not going to hit it off with. But I think that's where you have to be very aware of, like, I like that person, but also making sure you're not being different. And I was probably more cautious about maintaining those boundaries than most of my peers. Because like I didn't connect with anybody on Instagram until after I was no longer in a leadership relationship with people, because I felt really importantly, I didn't want that to become an issue for us. And because I wasn't going to go, I didn't really want to know that much about my team. Like, I mean, I want to know what they're willing to tell me. Right? What do you want me to know about you? What are you willing to share with me? But like, do I need to see my 20-year-old analyst chugging beers with his friends playing pool? No, not really. like my concerns are what do you want me to know about you personally? And then how do I help you succeed professionally? Like, that is my job. And so I know, there's definitely people that I liked, but it was like I always tried to make sure I stayed as balanced as I could, and I just try to be aware of it, but it's hard, you know.
Agreed. It's compartmentalization, right? I mean, you can be friendly with someone on a personal level, but you can't let that cross over into what you do professionally and how you work together at work. You know, like I have some employees, like, you know, we talk sports, we talk hunting, we talk cooking. You know, I love to cook, and that's great. But we keep that to those subjects as much as we can. And when something comes up in a conversation that started as a friendly conversation about something not work related and transitions to work, I flip a switch And now we're not going to if we're going to talk business, we're going to talk business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's a different me that you're going to get. And I try not to be black and white with it, right? You don't want to just like go from being ha 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 and then like, okay, well, your KPI sucked this week and you're not really hitting your numbers, because that serves no purpose either.
I don't know. That sounds like a very efficient leadership style.
Oh yeah. But there's a wall that goes up there, and it has to, because I don't want, and because I try to put myself in their shoes, right? Like and in some aspects, like I have been on that side of that coin where, I'm talking to my boss and we're having a friendly conversation, and all of a sudden business comes up and like he's still being friendly, and I'm like, well, no, like I want to have a serious conversation about this. Like I want to talk about my KPIs, and you gave me my review and it didn't work, and we're not friends anymore. Like this is Jerry, the employee, talking to the boss, right? So that's how I try to handle that as best I can, and I'll usually use okay, well, now it's Jerry the boss or Jerry the RVP is talking to you, or vice versa. It's like, okay, guys, business is done. Let's just shoot the shit. Like let's have a fun conversation. And I like to do that PSA so that everybody knows, hey, a line's been drawn. Like we've crossed the Rubicon, right?
Well, and what I would say too, Erin, and one thing that I was just, as Jerry was talking, I was thinking about, I never shared anything personally with only one person. So if I was going to share anything about my personal life or what was going on with me personally, I shared it with the whole team.
Okay.
So like if a team member came and talked to me and was telling me things that were personal, I took that as like the cone of like they're sharing with me. I never shared anything so that one person would get the perception that they had an in to my personal life that somebody else didn't have.
Okay.
So that was a good barometer for me as well, is like, if it's that important for me to tell the team about, then everybody should know. Like kind of the same thing. If we're talking about food, everybody needs to know I like to cook, or everybody could know I went and saw this movie this weekend and I loved it or hated it, whatever. Like I never wanted it to feel like somebody had inside information that everybody else wasn't privy to, because that's where I think the perceptions start to form that you have a closer relationship with somebody than somebody else.
That's great advice.
Because that can be a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Because that's just a quick way for, if I'm sharing this with one person, why am I not sharing it with everybody else? And again, because we all know perception is reality to people. Like it becomes reality very quickly. So yeah, that would be something I would say. And so leading into that, so kind of wrapping up I love this conversation. I think it's great. So for team members who feel that they are being left out, left behind, they're in a team that has some weird little dynamics going on, what advice would you give to that team member about approaching their leader?
Erin, you want to jump on this one first?
Yeah. So,
and maybe if they're not as brave as you, Erin, how would you help them?
That's what I'm trying to answer. Because my first response is get off your ass and do it. But no, I know everybody isn't as brave as me. So one of the things I would recommend first, ask someone else on the team, if they trust them, just say, hey, I want to have a conversation about what you're doing. If you don't necessarily know, because it may be that person was doing something that you're completely unaware of. And you can talk to your team members without being accusatory, I guess.
And gossipy.
Gossipy, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, or if there's someone that is more direct than you, go to that person and be like, have you ever talked to such and such about their relationship with Jay? Ask that person. Because if somebody were to come to me and say that, I'd be like, motherfucker, no, I have not. Let me go do that. And then I would. So that goes back to the whole manipulation thing.
You're like, I will take the lead. I will take the banner.
Exactly. If you have that person willing to do it, have that person do it. But it goes back to the conversation that you and I had last year.
Yeah.
Having those conversations. So everyone has to, like, a leader has to be willing to have a conversation with their subordinate. The subordinate has to be willing to have a conversation with their leader. Because again, nobody knows what's going on if nobody talks about it. And when you don't talk about it, that's when that shit festers. And that's when you have a toxic environment, because now people are gossiping about what everybody else is doing or what they think A is doing and how they're hanging out and going to coffee. And then it just blows up and everybody's reputation suffers. So basically, get off your ass and have a conversation.
I'd say the same. You can't be afraid to go and have an honest conversation both ways. Like you can't. I think that's one of the things that it really sucks as a manager when you have someone on your team that is willing to talk to everybody else, either
like you.
On the team, outside the team, but won't talk to you.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing, because I can try as hard as I can, sit down like, hey, let's just have an honest conversation. What's going on? Just talk to me. Like, if you're having issues, talk to me. We'll work through those together. Like, I want you to succeed. If you succeed, I succeed. That's how managers and leadership works. The better my people do, the better I look, the easier all of our lives are. And it's amazing how hard that concept is in practice most of the time, because people don't want to have those conversations. So for me, it's just be willing to go and have just an open conversation sometimes. And they're not meant to be easy. They're not. But that's where you get the most out of them.
Yeah.
If the two people or the people engaged, right. If the people engaged want to actually improve the situation and not just stir the pot.
Exactly.
Because people like to live in chaos.
Well,
We've got some people that just want to see the world burn.
Exactly.
Well, come on now. For some people, I think work is their trash TV. Like, that is like their Desperate Housewives. Like, and I mean, it again, you spend most of your time there, so you want it to be somewhat entertaining, but maybe not for those reasons. But the thing that always made me the saddest is when, like, somebody would come and file a complaint, and that was the first time the leader had ever heard that somebody was upset. And so going back to the thing, so kind of merging both of yours. So if you're an employee feeling like you are being disadvantaged in some way, I would do the same thing. I would talk to somebody I trust. I would also, if you have a mentor, go talk to them and say, what could I do differently? Especially if you're like scared to address it and you fear, because I think some people fear that they're going to be retaliated against if they surface something in some way. But I also think there's a way to approach it as well. And asking questions of, when you're having your one-on-one with your leader, is ask pretty bluntly, like, can you help me understand how this assignment happened?
Yeah.
I would have liked to have been considered for that. Why was I not a consideration? So without even mentioning the other person or calling somebody out, there are ways to ask around how decisions were made. Can you share with me, what do I need to do in order to be considered for this next time?
Yeah.
Because instead of just immediately jumping to the fact that, somebody was being favored, because going back to what Erin said, every single person I have led had their own development plan. They had their own things that they were working on, that they had limitations with. And so sometimes they were assigned things not because they were favored, but because that was something we were teeing them up because we were working towards a promotion. That's not a conversation we're having with the whole team. Or maybe somebody's a problem. Like, there's a lot of reasons why decisions get made that can never be discussed publicly. But you can still ask and say, how was that made? Like, at least if you want to dip your toe in it without being accusatory, start asking, just ask questions. And what I would encourage people to do, if you're scared, practice. And I would say the same thing for a leader is for these conversations. And I know it sounds really stupid, but I do it with people all the time. And I make them practice. Like, I would be the recipient and say, okay, how are you going to start this conversation? What's your first sentence? Tell me. And then we back into it like, well, did that go the way you thought it would? Did you say the things you wanted to say? No. Okay, let's start again. Pretend I'm this person. How would you do this? And so force yourself to actually practice what you're going to say before you actually have to go say it. Because that can be very helpful, especially if it's a conversation you're scared of. So,
and two things, if I can, Kim, on that, to your point, asking the question, what could I have done more to have gotten that opportunity? instead of why didn't I get it and that person got it. Just structuring that question differently allows a manager to be able to give you more feedback as it pertains to you, and not even have to bring in the other person. Because if you come the other way at it, you're looking to be, well, I can't talk to you about what somebody else did. Like, that's kind of canned answer there. The second piece I'd like to say too is going back to, sometimes a manager, the first time they hear about it is a formal complaint.
Yeah.
That is a hard thing for a manager to get, especially if they've tried. And I'm not saying that every manager does this, but from a manager who likes to try to be in touch with their people and think that they have good working relationships with their people, to all of a sudden get a formal complaint from HR as the first notification that there's an issue, that sucks from a manager's perspective. So just for the folks on the front line coming up to their managers, please don't let that be the first time you have some kind of notification or conversation with your boss that, hey, something's not right. Because that's going down a whole, that skews everything that comes after that. Yeah. Pretty much.
Well, and I would say that completely. So on the flip of this, because I think we've alluded to this, but just as a final thing, if there was one piece of advice you could give leaders who are moving into a position of leadership where they have a friend, what would be the one thing you would tell them? You absolutely have to go do this. And I think I know we've alluded to this, but I want to make sure we end on like the one thing a leader should go do.
Have a conversation and establish boundaries.
Yeah. Yep. Wholeheartedly agree.
Have conversations with each of your team members about what is and what is not going to be part of this relationship going forward. To be very specific. What do those boundaries look like for you?
And just accept that everything has changed.
Exactly.
Like, it's status quo is not status quo.
Yeah.
That you're it's a whole new world. And now you both of you need to navigate through that. And the right way to do that is through good communication on the front side and establish those boundaries up ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, leadership can be a great thing. It also can be, but it's also incredibly, incredibly hard. And so, again, reminding people, like, a lot of it is about, do you know yourself? You have to have thick skin, and you also have to be willing. If somebody is brave enough to come and tell you some stuff, you got to go ask some real questions, because I think too often leaders just dismiss it and think it's just cattiness or whatever. But especially if you hear it more than once, it's a trend. So you probably should go figure that out quickly. And if you don't
have
think
a conversation with the man in the mirror.
Well, no, I wouldn't even say that. This is when you need to like reach out to other people. Like, so do you have a mentor? Do you have your leader you can go talk to? Like, go seek out some guidance from some other people who might be willing to give you perspectives that you can't. If you can't figure it out, then you need to go talk to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And you need somebody who can challenge you a little bit, especially if you've heard it more than twice. Like, you need to go figure out what's happening.
And a great asset there is actually your company HR as a manager. Like, go and have a conversation with HR and say, hey, look, I've kind of heard this. I want to make sure that I am not doing something that's going to get me in trouble, right?
Or get the company in trouble.
Exactly.
Or get the company in trouble because your HR group, they hear everything. And a lot of people only think they have to go to HR when there's a problem, but you can be proactive as a manager and go and have a conversation with someone in HR and just say, hey, look, I've got some concerns. There's some things that kind of come up. I might need some help here. And your HR professionals in your company will help get you through that. Because at the end of the day, they want to protect the company, and you're a big piece of that.
Well, I just want to say thank you so very much for this amazingly lively conversation. I think I really want to create content where we're helping leaders do very hard things, but help understand it's very simple steps. Just because they're simple doesn't mean like they're super easy, but like having these conversations is not, you have to get them on the calendar. You have to talk to your people. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable a little bit. Because especially in these, it is going to be awkward and strange. and life is different. But I just want to thank you so much for being so transparent, so candid, and entertaining at the same time, because I know and love you both. And I have no doubt our listeners love you too. So thank you so much. Anything else before we go? Anything else?
Congratulations on your anniversary. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so for people listening, what they're referencing is it is the 1-year anniversary of my book, We've All Done It. If you haven't gotten it, go get it, because there's like special pricing right now on Amazon. Links are in the bio. And if you're not sure you want to buy it, you can actually get a free sample reading of it on my website. So go get that today. Don't wait. Choo choo. All right. Until next time, y'all. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of We've All Done It. I know your time is valuable. That's why I'm for as little BS as possible. Hopefully today's episode has sparked some new ideas for you. If you would like to learn more about the We've All Done It leadership framework or how to work with me, please check out my website at KimberlyJBenoit.com. Until next time.